Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. We fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom.
On this episode of Cigars and Sea Stories,
we've got Bennett Tanton, Michael Penney, and Tim Parkhurst. And we are privileged today to have a special guest with us. We've got independent presidential candidate Evan McMullin. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm pretty psyched about this because I'm a big fan, and I wanted to be the one to introduce you because I want to also do a full disclosure to our audience that I am a supporter of yours. And so, we're not exactly a journalistic outlet or anything like that, so we don't have to have all that kind of nonsense, but I like to let people know where I'm coming from. And
absolutely.
I just found out about you right after you launched your campaign, which has been how long now?
It's just been 4 weeks. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, and a lot of things have happened in that time. So I think probably where we should start is let you tell a little bit about your background and kind of what got you to this point.
Yeah, no problem. So I was born in Utah, and then my dad got a job after college up in the Seattle area for Boeing, and so we moved up there when I was very young. I grew up there, went to high school there, then went to Brigham Young University in Utah for undergrad. While I was there, I started working for the Central Intelligence Agency. I would do a semester on and a semester off, going back and forth between Utah and D.C., and then when I graduated, I went undercover. I went to the clandestine side of the house, which was at the time called the Directorate of Operations. Now it's known as the National Clandestine Service, and the name change happened while I was there. But anyway, I went undercover, went into training, and as that was getting started, 9/11 happened, and I finished out training, and once I was finally done, I volunteered to go serve in South Asia, in the Middle East, and North Africa for the next several years, running mostly counterterrorism operations, but also a full range of traditional covert intelligence operations in those regions and here and there elsewhere. And I did that for several years until 2010. I officially then resigned. I had started business school at Wharton, and then finished out my time there, and then started working for Goldman Sachs in the investment banking division in San Francisco. I did IPOs and M&A out there. Did that for the better part of 2 years, and while I was there, Chairman Royce took over the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. He asked me to come be his national security advisor. So I went and did that, and then after a couple of years, I was asked by House leadership to come up and be the chief policy director for the House Republicans. And in that role, I led a team that had responsibility for all foreign and domestic policy, for writing legislation and advancing policy initiatives as I said, all domestic and foreign policy. So that was a great experience, learned a lot, was there under Boehner, was there under Paul Ryan, learned an awful lot about Congress and about our government, the way it works, and about inefficiencies in our government that result in the American people feeling like they're not being heard or represented. Mm-hmm. So, that was a formative experience for me, certainly. And during the campaign cycle here, I was troubled by, of course, the prospects of Hillary Clinton becoming our next president, and then realizing that Donald Trump was likely to be the Republican nominee, and I believed he was a sure defeat, or he would suffer a sure defeat by Hillary Clinton, and I had my own concerns about him, regardless of how he would be able to compete with Hillary Clinton. And I hoped that somebody else would somehow become our nominee. That didn't happen, obviously. And after the conventions, I figured somebody would then step forward to be an independent candidate, somebody hopefully with national name ID and somebody with an infrastructure in place, hopefully, to campaign on. That didn't happen, and I learned that it wasn't going to happen. And so at that point, someone asked me if I would consider doing it. And I started thinking about it, and then after a week and a half of that, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still struggling with how to describe that period, because I just haven't found the right words for it. But I can tell you that I didn't sleep much, and
Yeah.
it's sort of recognizing that you're about to change your life forever. You know, I had a pretty good life before this started.
Pretty
Um,
clandestine life.
well,
Till,
yeah, pretty
till this
pretty
started.
normal life.
But
Pretty
yeah.
normal life, you know? I mean, I was doing good things. I was serving the country and still keeping a low profile,
Yeah.
which that's my sweet spot.
Now we can.
And yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. I gotta jump in here real quick because one
yeah.
of the things that what resonates with me is where you were when 9/11 took place, because everybody remembers that day, right? That day of infamy, where they were. Now you're in Langley. You were in basic training essentially, right? When that went down.
When it happened, I was in a classroom in the basement of CIA headquarters, and with no windows. And I was, got there early for this class, and we were there, in the morning, and we're due to be there all morning. And at one point, this little old lady, I'll never forget, this little white-haired lady wearing a dress and tennis shoes, poked her head in the door and said, "Do you guys know what's happening?" And we said, "No, what's happening?" And she said, "The trade towers have been attacked." So I immediately, we all ran. I think she said something to the fact that you've got to get out of here. So I ran up to my office, and everybody was watching the television. And then I think I'm forgetting already what we actually saw, but the Pentagon had either just been attacked or was attacked while we were out there.
Yeah, you're like down the road, you know?
Yeah, just down the road, exactly. We were from the Pentagon. And I just said, I said, we got to get out of here. And, my boss confirmed that. So we all ran out into the parking lot. I think it took an hour for us to get out of the parking lot because so many people were trying to vacate the building. I thought the next target could be the agency.
Well, right, and rightfully so. One of the things at that time that I thought of it wasn't like a bloodlust, like a vengeance, but it was one of those things where I needed to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who are ready. And I was just wondering, was that like, oh yeah, I'm going to be an analyst, and then 9/11 happened, and you're like, okay, it's trigger time. I'm going to the sandbox. Yeah. This is happening. Fly planes in my building. What was going on at that moment?
Well, it certainly was very motivating, as you can imagine, as I'm sure was for you. But, basically all along, though, even when I was in college, before the agency actually hired me, I intended to go to the field. That was my goal. And in fact, even at BYU, I remember, I was on scholarship. I didn't have a lot of money, so my scholarship was like everything to me. And I knew that if I wanted to work at the agency, my grades had to be very good. So I didn't party, I didn't date. I just basically hung out in the basement of the library and studied all the time. But one of the things I studied was counterterrorism. And I remember reading books written by Israeli counterterrorism experts, even one by Netanyahu. There was this thin book he had written. And others about how it was done. Of course, we've learned a lot since then, and we know more than anybody, I'm convinced. But I was anticipating that this country would have a terrorism problem, even in 1998 and in 1997. And so I envisioned myself going to the field. At the time, when the agency hired me, though, they didn't have roles for students in the clandestine side of the organization. It was only in the Directorate of Intelligence, which is where the analysts are. So that's when I was going back and forth between Utah and DC. That's what I was doing. I was an analyst trainee, but inside, and that was a great thrill for a young man reading SIGINT and HUMINT and looking at all that. As a kid, you're going crazy. It's you literally, I would drive in and out of the headquarters there facility just on cloud nine every day. It was just an incredible experience. But I knew that my future was not in the Directorate of Intelligence. I knew that my future was on the ops side overseas.
Yeah. Did you serve in Iraq or Afghanistan?
Yes, I served in both places. I was in Iraq for about a year and a half, and in Afghanistan for short-term gigs.
Nice. I was in Ramadi. Anywhere around there?
Oh, okay. No, I was there during the surge, and I was based out of the Green Zone and would deploy around, but never actually to Ramadi, fortunately and unfortunately.
Oh, you're lost. You're lost.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
How about Hellman? Anywhere through there?
No, never in Hellman's. Never in Hellman's. Is that where you were?
Yeah, I was in Kajaki and Sangan, and then Tim over here, he fought in Sangan, so it was just, didn't know if we chewed some of the same dirt.
No, I was, spent a little bit of time at Bagram, but was across the border a lot.
Gotcha.
Yeah, between the three of us here, we've got a fairly wide variety of experiences. I'm the oldest of the bunch at 49, so everything I talk about is pretty much ancient history. But these
you don't sound 49.
Yeah, I faked it pretty good.
He tells us about the old Corps.
Right. Well, and so do I. Unfortunately, I'm 42, but I was in the Corps from 92 to 96, and then the Army from 98 to 03. Switched to the dark side.
Bennett's not only our middle child; he's also our turncoat.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
of course, Michael's the one with all the recent experience, so he's fresh off the battlefield, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
But,
Ish.
Yeah.
Ish.
When did you come home?
So my last day in uniform was May 12th, 2012.
Oh, okay.
So Ramadi 05, 07, Sangan, Kajaki in 2011.
Okay, great. So you were in Ramadi when I was in Baghdad.
There you go. So we were
Cool.
playing terrorist ping pong.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
it's always,
I guess that's a really good way to put it.
it like heats
Yeah,
up.
we had a lot of good people out in Ramadi doing good things. I guess you were part of that. There was good work being done there in those days.
Yeah, and of course, you know how it is because you come from that community. You're a Marine, a jarhead, you stand post, we all look the same, blah, blah, blah. So it makes perfect sense. The majority of the company guys that we see are like stone-faced. They just wouldn't talk to us. They just didn't care. Which was totally fine. I didn't give a damn. I wanted to go downrange and slay bodies. So it was like we just kind of were in two different worlds working around one another. And I understood that it was like, all right, this is my sector. But there's a little bit of jealousy seeing all you Jason Bourne types, walking around. You're like, damn, what do those guys do?
Jack Ryan, Shadow Warrior.
Jack Ryan, yes. Let's go Clancy. I agree. Go old school. Ugh.
Yeah.
I'm a Harrison Ford Ryan fan, by the way.
To make the most of our opportunity to have a presidential candidate on here, we got to talk politics for a minute.
Yeah.
So, one of the biggest things that I see when I'm talking to friends, acquaintances, I see it all over social media. There are so many people that are either voting Hillary or voting Trump, but they're holding their nose while they're doing it, and they're only doing it to spite the other candidate. They're not doing it because they believe in their candidate. They're just totally against the other one. And so I want you to try to explain to our listeners why you're a better choice. Why can people get behind you? And I guess part of that is also how electable are you? And why should they get behind you as opposed to voting against Hillary or whatever? Yeah,
well, that is all of that. That is the question of the day here, really. I'm actually writing an op-ed right now on an important point I'll make in response to your question, and that is this lesser of two evils, a paradigm that I feel like we have been pushed into as voters. This idea that you've got Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and the Republicans and the Democrats, and you're really voting. You don't like either one, but you've got to choose one, and so you're going to choose the lesser of two evils. And so, in part, we end up that way because we continue to accept that paradigm. As long as we accept that we're going to have to do that, the more we just get more of that. And I feel like we get leaders right now. I just came from Congress where, frankly, not all of them are like this. There are a lot of great people, great members of Congress, don't get me wrong, but there are too many people who are putting their own interests ahead of those of the country. People who are concerned about losing their next election more than they are concerned about making the tough leadership choices to lead this country to a better place. And I think that those are the kinds of leaders we get when we accept this idea, this lesser of two evils framework for choosing our leaders. So some people would say, well, look, those are our options. So what are we going to do? I think we as voters actually need to take a more proactive posture and identify people who we want to lead us and then push those people forward. Right now, it's a very passive thing. It's like, okay, well, who's deciding to run? And usually these tend to be oftentimes, at least for president, at least the nominees, people who are trying to serve themselves ultimately, not serve the country. So there's more to sort of develop around that thought. But I really think we got to somehow get past this lesser of two evils way of thinking about things. And it's going to require us to be more proactive in the way we engage with our democracy. But why people should vote for me as opposed to the other two in this election, the two major party candidates, is simply that the other two are so unfit for service. It's both their motives for wanting to be president of the United States. I think Hillary Clinton is somebody who's been on a quest for power for a long, long time. Donald Trump is just about fame and fortune for himself. The guy's never done anything for anybody of any real consequence or sacrifice. They both have no credibility on national security issues at all. People say, well, Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. And I say, well, yeah, she was. But as Secretary of State, she presided over Al-Qaeda in Iraq's reconstitution, and which now, has become ISIS and the largest terrorist army we've ever seen, at least in modern times. She was responsible for an approach to Russia that empowered Putin. She was responsible for the beginning of a flawed negotiation with Iran that has yielded a deal that I think ensures their nuclear armament. Then it comes down to issues of government reform on so many levels. We've got a government that is, spending way too much money, and we've got a national debt of $19.5 trillion. We're adding $2.4 billion a day to that. And we have two major party candidates who don't want to talk about reforming entitlements, which are the major source of our deficits and our debt. So they're not being honest to the American people. So they're putting us on a path of fiscal ruin, as well as a path that will deprive Americans of their liberty, because ultimately, these leaders are going to be tempted to tax our way out of that fiscal crisis that I think is coming. So anyway, there's so many other reasons. And then the other thing is just, I believe that we've been a divided country for far too long. And these two major party candidates further divide us. Donald Trump, I believe, divides us with his bigoted rhetoric, and Hillary Clinton divides us with these ideas of a large centralized government in Washington that can't possibly be responsive to our diverse country's needs. The people in Vermont want different things than the people in Utah. And it's just impossible for that all to be brokered at a central government level. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm a big 10th Amendment guy. I think more power needs to be returned to the states so that it's accountable to the people. Yeah. And I'll pause there, but there's a lot going on.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up because, we're bouncing around the idea of, frankly, just to be honest with you, having you on the show, because our whole premise here is we need to have veterans. Right? You're the only presidential candidate that's out there right now, Evan McMullin, who has served our nation downrange in that capacity. Now, You and I were in Iraq around the same time, and I'm pretty sure you remember the election cycle that Iraqis had to deal with, that we were involved in. I had to sit out there on cordons and set up all of the election booths and so on and so forth from the grunt work aspect of it. And what's funny about today in our modern American nation, I see a resemblance of how the Iraqis felt to what was being offered to them. They were just like, we don't necessarily want what you have got for us on the table, and a lot of them were prideful to show up. You're talking about an election where you could probably get blown up going and casting your ballot, and they're showing up in droves because they understand, this is the power that you hold as an individual within society. But it's so strange now coming home a decade later and you're looking at what's going on, and it really, you can see that division, so it's almost like there's a convincing that needs to be made here along the lines of it is two lesser evils, and really how are we going to push that guidon forward? I hear that it's going to be state power and what have you, especially with the 10th Amendment, but also the convention in the states in order to pull a lot of different power that's back there as well. If there was a convention in the states and we as the people said, hey, we want to enforce, to whatever extent, that 10th Amendment. Is that something that you, as the executive, would pass forward or veto?
No, I mean, I would have to see exactly what it says, but I'm inclined to support that kind of thing. I really think that our lack of respect for the 10th Amendment is at the center of our division in this country. Like, we can unite the country, but it's not because we're all going to agree on issues. It's we can unite around our liberties, around our mutual liberty. That's how we can unite. I mean, it's e pluribus unum. It's the idea that we can be different and diverse, but still unite as one nation. The way that happens is if power is closer to the people. It's through self-government, which is best done when power is closest to the people, and it's through having tolerance around the idea that that we get to make our own decisions and other people get to make theirs, and that's going to happen at the individual level, it's going to happen at the state level, and then we need to be united around a mutual defense of those liberties. But that's how we can be united as a country, and I'm supportive of that. I mean, there's some basic things that can happen. For example, I mean, more block grants to states. That's a basic first step where you basically return more money to the states without strings attached, and you let states decide how they're going to spend that money on certain things. That's one thing that can be done. It's about deferring more decisions and lawmaking to the states. That's something that the Supreme Court has to respect too, though. It's not just the executive branch or even the legislative branch.
Yeah. Have you thought about Supreme Court nominees?
Yes, I have. I mean, the way to think of it, the way to understand the way I look at it is I think we need to have more originalists on the court. I think the Constitution is truly an inspired document. I think we are blessed to have it. And I think we need more justices who are going to enforce the Constitution. And so, if elected, I will be appointing originalists, and that's the way I look at it.
Awesome. Yeah, so I know Bennett probably had a question for you, but I just want to say something before he jumps in. I actually started a petition on change.org the other day, and so far the only supporter is me, but I'm working on it.
What's the petition?
The title of it is "Abolish the Winner Takes All in the Electoral College," and it's basically because when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution and they wrote the articles that pertained to elections, there was no intention of having simply a two-party system. There was every intention of having a multi-party system, and I think they thought that because they recognized, just like you say, that there are so many people from so many diverse backgrounds that have so many wants, desires, needs, whatever. You're not going to agree on everything, and to be able to focus on the core issues, the things that we all do have in common, but allow the liberty to go and live our lives individually without being constrained by law. That's sort of the cornerstone of the liberty that the Constitution grants us. And what I discovered in looking into this, because I was looking into the Electoral College, is that the states control election law by and large, and
that's right.
It used to be, even though it sort of worked out that there were really only two parties that had any real influence at any given time, starting in the 1800 election and moving forward. It alternated between 3 or 4 different parties, not just the two, just like you have now with the Republicans and Democrats. And it wasn't until the Civil War timeframe when the Republicans and Democrats were the only two parties left, and then they started pushing to change state election laws to the winner takes all for the electoral vote. So if you might not even get, if you're a candidate in North Carolina where I live and you only got 30% of the popular vote, but that's 1% more than the next guy, you still get all of the electoral votes for the state. That didn't always used to be the case. In fact, it wasn't in most states, but now it is in all but 2 states. And my petition is basically to raise awareness, to potentially have a constitutional amendment to go back to issuing those electoral votes proportionally to all the legitimate candidates that gain a portion of the popular vote. I think we still need to have the Electoral College, but we need to kind of change how it's used, because the two parties have used it to entrench their power and shut down other voices.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, and the system the way it is seems less democratic than what you're petitioning to create and return the system to. I mean, there's no question that both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have a stranglehold on the process. I mean, I'm living that every day as we get on the ballots and as we face, a very steep climb in certain states. Some states simply have laws, and this is, you were talking about the Electoral College. I'm talking about something slightly different here, but I think it's part of the same puzzle, and that is ballot access. And some states clearly have laws designed to keep independent candidates off of the ballots. And the Electoral College winner-take-all scenario is also one, as you point out, that's designed to protect the two major parties and keep others out of it. That would be okay if the two major parties were doing a good job serving the interests of the American people. But 82% of Americans feel like the country's on the wrong track. And 42% of Americans now consider themselves independents. And only 28% consider themselves Republicans, and another 28 Democrat. So given all of that and the unpopularity of these two major party candidates, I think it's just absolutely painfully clear that we've got to make some changes, and the American people are looking for other options.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you look at every poll that I've looked at in the last, like 2 months, the two major party candidates are more unpopular than they are popular. Our Congress's approval numbers are the lowest pretty much that they've ever been in. They're the lowest that they've been for such a long period of time. When you're talking below 20 to 30% for years, something's wrong. Okay. So
Right.
I guess what I'm getting at is that America's confidence in our government is so shattered and so divided that what do we do to really bring a confidence back to candidates, or to like, if you get elected, what are things that you think that you could do to bring confidence back to the American people that our country isn't a punchline? Like the politics, when we talk politics in a lot of areas, it's a punchline, and that's really sad.
I think it is sad, and I think you're describing it as a punchline. It's similar to a headline I saw in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago that said that millennials view this election as a joke. I mean, I was we just posted a video of this conversation I had with a few millennials in Utah when I was out there last week, and they were talking about how they just don't feel represented by either party. And, so that's sort of to the earlier point we were having. But what I think needs to happen is power needs to be transferred back closer to the people. It's all about power being accountable to the people. And right now it isn't. It isn't because it's centralized in Washington, and especially in the executive branch. You've got, there are very specific reasons for this, but a lot of power that should belong to Congress, according to Article 1, which says only Congress can legislate. A lot of that power over the last several decades has been shifted to the executive branch, which now makes very large and impactful rules and regulations that have the force of law without any consideration by the people's elected leaders. So in Washington, our balance of powers needs to be rebalanced, and a big part of that is that executive branch rulemaking activity needs to be transferred back to the legislative branch where it belongs. So that's one thing. The other thing is pushing power back to the states. And so that I believe is the key to so much in this country, just moving power back to the people so it's closer to the people. My mom is a city executive in this city north of Seattle. And I know some of her colleagues, and I know that when people in that city are upset, they show up on the doorstep of my mom and of other people in that city. I mean, that power is accountable to the people. And that's sort of, nobody shows up on the doorstep of, certainly the president or, bureaucrats living in Washington.
You used to be able to do that, but now they'd shoot you.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or you'd never be able to find them or know who they are. I mean, it's a labyrinth. I mean, but power is no longer accountable to the people in our country, and that is the root of so many problems. So we've got to, as I said, transfer more power from the executive branch to the legislative branch, and then transfer far more power back to the states. And we're going to solve a lot of problems doing that.
And then the other point that I want to bring up is the role of special interests and money. I mean, money makes the world go round. We have to have it, obviously. You can't run a campaign without money, right? But there's a point when I think we need to hearken back to responsibility, that just because someone, it's the fact of being beholden to somebody because they want something from you. And unfortunately, I see, and I'm sure you would agree, that too often our elected officials are influenced unduly upon by special interests, corporations. I'm all for capitalism, but there's a balance that has to be met, or that has to be reached somehow, where just because somebody gives me a $3 million campaign contribution, that they don't write policy.
Right.
And that's unfortunately what is happening.
Exactly.
And that it's so against what this country was based upon and what it's supposed to be about, the for the people, by the people, that a corporation, I still can't get over that ruling that a corporation is a person. We can go into that. That's a whole nother thing. But at the end of the day, when it comes to campaign finance, that comes into play hugely. So that's the other point that I wanted you to possibly touch on is I mean, that's a tough question. And unfortunately, the two major candidates they won't touch it. They'll just point fingers at each other. They won't actually talk about it. So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I agree. There's too much money in politics, and this isn't happening in a vacuum. I mean, it's related to what we were talking about before, with too much power being located in Washington versus the states. So right now, so much power is in Washington that corporations more specifically, but people too, wealthy individuals, but also corporations, are willing to spend that kind of big money to influence things in Washington. And it also means that regular citizens have less of a say for a variety of reasons. But I think this 10th Amendment thing, the idea of empowering states and giving states their proper power, that is going to help on the money and politics side too, because if you disperse the power throughout the country, then you will not have as many big checks and big dollars chasing the laws and decisions made by the federal government in Washington, because it just will be of less consequence. So I think that's a key part of it. Again, is let these guys go. Look, we've got to have lobbyists and associations and people engaging on behalf of individual private groups and charities and corporations. We need all that. But the problem is that when you centralize so much power in one place and far away from the people, and you make it a very complex thing to engage with the government, then you're empowering these huge special interests while weakening the individuals who are really the source of all power in our country, or should be. So again, it's about making power more accountable to the people, and you do that by moving power closer to them.
So one of the things that you hear the other two candidates talking about, the two major candidates, is what they're going to do on day one. They're all full of bluster and hot air. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and they're going to repeal this, or they're going to ram this down our throats, or whatever. And that's awesome. And there's probably a certain amount of that might need to happen. But I was just wondering if you have a list of items that perhaps you have in your sights for say the first 100 days kind of thing.
Yeah, I do. I mean, one of the major things is I'm going to ask my national security team to deliver a comprehensive strategy to me for defeating ISIS, and I'm going to ask that they, once they've done that, that they then take it to our allies, and obviously I would help with that, and it needs to be a strategy that takes into consideration the input of our allies, so that we actually can build a coalition that's motivated to do what needs to be done. Right now, we've got our allies don't believe we have a comprehensive strategy. They don't believe that the strategy we do have is capable of success. And because of that, they're not really in the fight the way we need them to be in the fight. So that's the first. That's one of the first things I'll do. The other thing is, working with Paul Ryan in the House to advance a lot of the agenda items that he and members of the House Republicans have put together in their Better Way agenda. One of them is something called the REINS Act, which is a bill that basically returns, as I said, some of that rulemaking power that the executive branch has taken over, and that it sends it back to the legislative branch. That's something that I would try to see advance through Congress as quickly as possible and on my desk so I could sign it. There are a lot of other things. Tax reform is really important. We also have to do something much better on healthcare. I think we need to go to a model that provides advanceable tax credits to Americans that will allow them to go out and buy insurance on a private market. Right now, we've got this system that, yes, it's allowed people who were uninsured to get insured. That's not a bad thing. I think we're a wealthy enough country to improve access to quality, affordable health care for all Americans. But we can't have the system now where people in the middle class, really hardworking people, are paying huge premiums, and then their deductibles are so high that they can't even use the insurance for their day-to-day healthcare needs. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, I was just talking to a family the other day, and their deductible for every member of their family is $7,500. So they never get to that in an annual basis, yet they're paying thousands of dollars every month in premiums. I mean, it's out of control. So we've got to come up with a better system, and I think that advanceable tax credit that I'm describing, that's a way to return the system back to a market-based system, but ensure that people can get health care. We need to reform insurance laws so that people with pre-existing conditions can still get coverage, and so that people can buy health care across state lines, because right now it's all sectioned off by state, which decreases competition, which means that we all pay even before Obamacare, more for insurance than we should. So these are some of the things. I mean, it's also about regulation for me. We've got a lot of regulations on the books and regulatory uncertainty, which at times is even worse than overregulation, that are slowing down the economy. We've got to get the economy growing at more than just 2% GDP a year. Right now, that's been the average annual growth in real terms for the last 10 years, and we cannot have the economic opportunity we need for people who are at all levels, all economic levels, unless we're growing at least 3%. So that's about tax reform. It's about regulation reform. It's about education too. There are just so many things. But the good thing is we ought to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I'll have a cabinet for that. There are a lot of things I want to do. One other thing I'll mention on the military, as you guys know well, I mean, we're still using equipment that was from the Reagan era. And we're still the most powerful nation, or the most powerful military. Our military is the most powerful on earth. But we have overtaxed the military and underinvested in it for decades. And we've got to correct that ASAP. So that would be another thing that I would work with Congress to do.
So my last question, and then I'm out of the way. And this is the biggest question. I'm sorry to step on your mic, but I got to get it in because it's the thing that's most near and dear to my heart.
It's stuck in his craw.
It is, yeah. it's. I mean, I am a federal employee. I put myself out there every day to help our veterans. I am a veteran. 95% of our audience are veterans. And not a whole lot of us are satisfied with the Veterans Administration, period.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm an employee, okay?
Oh, are you an employee of the VA?
Yes, I am. And I have no qualms saying that. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, though, I get my care from them as well. So I'm just as dissatisfied as a patient.
Right.
I'm satisfied with the workload that I put forward and a lot of my coworkers. But unfortunately, it's almost like there's two systems there. There's the system of the hardworking individuals that care about veterans and really want to help them. But yet we're stuck in this gigantic bureaucracy because it's the largest healthcare system in the world. And how do we fix it? Because I don't have the answers. But this is why you're running for president.
Exactly.
I am not, because I don't, and I'm not saying you do, but you probably have a better spot because of your experience. Where do we how do we fix this?
Well, this is the first time in 4 weeks anybody has asked me about the VA, and it's actually an area of some pretty serious passion for me, and it's an area that when I was working in Congress, I did some work on. This is the thing. The VA does a lot, as you know, other than healthcare, but most, and it does a lot well, actually. But when it comes to healthcare, it just isn't getting the job done in the way it needs to get the job done. And this is the way I think about it. I think that veterans ought to be able to get their healthcare, use their benefit that they've earned, that they're owed. They ought to be able to use their VA benefit, healthcare benefit, to get healthcare wherever they want. They ought to be able to go to the VA, or they ought to be able to go to the corner clinic or the Cleveland clinic, wherever they want. Americans, when they're insured, they get to go where they want. Of course, Obamacare has limited that, but they still have choices. Now, it just is inconceivable to me that we would say to vets, here's your health care benefit. You have to receive your health care from the VA. Now, of course, there's a choice card out there which isn't being well implemented, but it's a step in the right direction in theory. But my view is that it is absolutely insane that we do not allow our vets, our heroes, to take that benefit and go get health care wherever they want, whether it be at the VA or on the private market. Now, as soon as you say that, there are complications and there are major reforms and restructuring that would need to happen to the VHA in order to make it possible for a system like I just described it. But there are proposals out there to do that. There are a few different proposals. I'm open to a lot of different ideas, but I start from the place that veterans should be able to choose. Why should they be able to choose? Because then they have power. They're empowered when they can choose. If VHA knows that vets have to come to them for their benefit care, then the vet has no leverage in that equation.
It limits their accountability.
It limits their accountability. The vet can do nothing. I was, several weeks ago, I was in Spokane, Washington for this event, talking about some new ideas that were centered upon this basic principle that I've just described of letting vets choose. And after the event, some guys from Vietnam approached me, guys from Iraq and Afghanistan. These are grown men, combat vets, tough guys who were breaking down in tears to me over how they'd been treated by the VA and the hardship that they felt in their lives as a result of being forced to only deal with the VA for their benefit care. Like, it is just, it is maddening. We've got to empower the vets by letting them choose. We've got to have a system that does that.
Yeah, I'll tell you one of the things about the VA system in general that is probably the most infuriating thing, and I would think that this is probably true for most veterans that have a negative experience there, is it may or may not be the actual care they get, but the one thing that every veteran experiences with the VA is that at every step in the process, no matter what it is you're trying to get done, you have to apply, and then you have to reapply, and then reapply, and then apply again. And it gets to a point where you feel like you're literally begging for scraps from the table for something that you know is a benefit that you earned.
Right.
But damned if they don't make you feel like you're just begging for it, and they're just kind of holding a carrot over your head.
Right.
And that the emotional aspect of that is just crushing to some guys.
That carrot and stick mentality is just it's stifling. It's pain. I mean, guys give up. This is why we have Vietnam veterans. And at this point, when we talk like veteran suicide, they're the guys that are committing suicide. And a lot of these guys, unfortunately, they came back, never applied for, or they did apply for VA healthcare. They looked at it as a joke. They walked away, and now at the time when they need it the most, they have to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop to get that care. It's frankly, it's criminal.
It's absolutely awful, and that's why we have got to empower the vets themselves. And what I think would happen if you start with the premise that the vets get to choose, then it means that a vet who lives 100 miles away from his nearest VA facility gets to go to the clinic down the road. I mean, it's of course it should be.
It's so simple.
Oh, but wait,
so
that makes
simple,
sense.
right?
You wouldn't want to do that. It makes sense.
Now,
Exactly.
Do you guys coming out of the CIA, do you have a similar healthcare structure to us? Like when you
No,
resigned? How's that work?
No, we don't. Yeah, we don't. I mean, it's sort of, we're not, I mean, we don't even get to use the word vet, I mean, we don't get any of that, unfortunately, but, it's a little bit different. Like when you're in the CIA, you can walk away at any moment. At any moment you want to say, all right, I'm done with this. You get to say, all right, I'm done with this, and you walk away.
I resign.
Yeah, but when you're in the military, you sign up, and you really sign up. So there are certain benefits, and you're out there in combat. I was operating in and around on the fringes of it, but my job was not to engage. My job was to sneak around and avoid engagement and do what I needed to do. But it's a different thing. So I think our military deserves, people who serve in that role deserve certain benefits that guys in the agency don't necessarily. But no, it's just totally different. We're not, we don't even use that term for ourselves, vets. Although I would be proud of it if we could, but it just isn't that way.
So we get asked all the time, like, oh man, what's your favorite movie? All of this other stuff. So I got to lay it on you from a CIA perspective. I mean, what are we talking here? Like Tom Clancy, Body Lies, maybe 13th Hour? What's the best portrayal of the job that you did or that you enjoyed, not Hollywood-esque?
Yeah, well, first of all, so I don't watch a lot of those movies, to be honest, but I can give you a few that I think are good. So the thing that first got me interested in the agency was a movie called 3 Days of the Condor. It's this old 70s Robert Redford spy flick.
Yeah,
totally
great.
cool. Yeah, great film, still one of the best. As far as more modern ones, I'm partial to Zero Dark 30 because of my own personal experience that is then portrayed in that. And then I also think, gosh, what was that other one? It was about the hostage, Argo, the Iranian hostage.
Oh yeah, that was a great movie. I like that.
Yeah, that was also a good one. And the reason why I like that one is that it really accurately portrays what a high-stakes traditional CIA operation is about, where you've got this very mild-mannered CIA operative who's under immense pressure but sort of keeps it all bottled up inside, and you've got headquarters yanking you around about what you can do and what you can't do. You're in the field in the middle of the operation, and you're getting calls telling you to stand down and stand up and that sort of thing.
Alone and unafraid, baby.
What's that?
Alone and Unafraid.
Yeah, exactly. So those are three movies that I'm partial to, I think.
What about Homeland? You like that show?
I have never watched it.
I kind of just had to throw it out there though. But what do you do? What do you do to? It is hokey. But what do you do to relax and like recharge? Because I know you're a busy, busy, busy man, and you're running around like crazy. What do you do to just kind of like take a deep breath, chill out, and what do you enjoy to do in Evan time?
Well, I haven't had a lot of Evan time in quite some time. Not only in the last 4 weeks, but I like to run. Really, I like to run, and I like to read. If I can hike, if I can get away and be as far away from civilization as possible, that takes some effort these days, and a flight usually to start with, because on the East Coast here, it's really hard to get out and hike without seeing a house in the distance somewhere. But if I can do that, I'm a happy camper. I mean, I just, that's in fact, when this is all over, no matter what happens, I will, pursue some serious wilderness isolation for a while, no doubt.
Yeah, that's my favorite
So
thing too.
what book are you reading?
Well, I'm reading a book right now that I think is I've read enough of it to say it's a must read for all Americans. It's called The World America Made by Robert Kagan. It talks about the America's influence after World War II on the world system. Basically, its security system, its economic system. It makes the point basically that since World War II and since the U.S. has played a stronger role in the world order, we haven't had additional world wars. Several 100 million people have been lifted out of poverty around the world. There are now over 100 democracies in the world, whereas before there was about 14 at that time of World War II. And it basically just says, look, like, America's not perfect by any means, but don't discount the role that we have played in the world since World War II. We have had a very, very positive effect net effect on the world since then. And I think that's very much missing from our dialogue these days. And a lot of people talk about Iraq and feel like we made a mistake there. And we certainly spent a lot of money, and people feel like we're prone to foreign adventures. And you can make that argument, but we're not perfect. But I think it's useful to remember that this country and its influence around the world has done tremendous good for us and for the world since World War II.
Yeah, that is a really good book. I actually read it.
Oh, cool.
I finished it about a month ago.
Oh, great.
Spoiler
And
alert.
yeah, well, it's just I love because I get so sick of hearing this. I guess the best way to describe it is the declinist attitude of a lot of Americans when, if they just look at the numbers, we're not declining at all. If anything, we're getting a lot of our citizenry is getting stronger. And I think that book is a good argument against that. Right. That we aren't declining.
Well, I think that speaks to a big degree to what we started off the conversation with, which is, sort of how do you how did you differentiate yourself from Trump and Hillary, who are attacking each other, and all the negativity and the divisiveness and all this sort of thing, and trying to bring a more positive message, something that's a little more uplifting that people can actually believe in. Right. And I think if people knew what Kagan writes in the book, there are so many empirical data points that show that things are better. They really are better. They're not everything is getting worse. Some things certainly do, and have gotten worse, but not everything. And the gloom and doom is highly overrated, and it's really used to instill fear in us so that we'll vote a certain way, which I freaking hate that. Oh my God, I hate that.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it.
I will not vote out of fear.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, I mean, look, it's true that there are some people in our economy who are really struggling. And it is also true that although I'm a big proponent of trade, we've got to trade in order for our economy to grow. It's just But look, some of our trade deals could have been better. And there are some countries out there who take advantage of our goodwill and our lack of strong negotiators, I think, in the executive branch at times. But so we need to acknowledge that there are people out there who are struggling, but we can do that at the same time that we that we make the point that you just did about the fact that, hey, there is a lot that is good in this world and a lot that has gotten even better and is getting better. I mean, I think, look, there's more reason to be optimistic about the world, about our future, than there is to be pessimistic. I mean, you look at the advancements in science, and I think we're close to, I think, curing cancer and heart disease and
lots of breakthroughs lately.
Lots of breakthroughs, absolutely. So there's a lot that's going good. It would be going well. It would be such a shame if we allowed a guy, in my view, like Donald Trump, who's going to come in and exploit the challenges of some people to empower himself, and throw a lot of that away, or someone like Hillary Clinton, who I think is just so corrupt and committed to this big unaccountable government that it stifles the kind of research that we're talking about, specifically in healthcare and in other areas. But that's why I keep coming back to this idea that we need a new generation in this country, a new generation of leadership, and it's a generation of leadership that isn't held back by these old ideas of bigotry and misogyny on one side, and a generation of leadership that really understands individual liberty and the strength that it gives this country, which means we can't have this big, powerful, unaccountable government in Washington. And I just feel like both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and their parties, frankly, at this point, and it makes me sad to say this coming from the Republican place I came from, but I just feel that both of the parties right now are living in the past. And they've either got to adapt, or I believe that they are going to be challenged in the future in a serious way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I had one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I know you've talked about it a lot in pretty much every venue that you've been in public lately. Ballot access.
Yep.
For those people out there who are holding their nose while voting for Hillary or for Trump, and just wishing that there was someone else that was a viable candidate.
Right.
How do you reassure those folks that you are indeed viable and that you have the ability to get elected?
Well, for us, it's all about denying both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump a majority in the Electoral College. So, we entered this race late because, we realized that it was the last moment possible. So what we're dealing with now is the need for a non-traditional campaign and a non-traditional strategy. So our strategy is to block them from getting a majority in the Electoral College. We're on 9 or 10 states' ballots right now. We're going to be on several others as we go forward. We're also registering in almost every other state as a write-in candidate. There are a couple of states that we won't be on because we're not on the ballots and they don't allow write-ins, which I think we also will probably challenge legally. So that may actually work out for us too.
What is it? 43 states allow write-ins, something like that?
Yes, exactly. And we're on a few of the ones that don't. We're on the ballots. Nevada's one in particular that we'd really like to be on. They don't allow write-ins, but that's again, I think that's vulnerable to legal challenge. But the bottom line is the vast majority of Americans who want to cast their vote for me will be able to do that on November 8th. Now, the way we're going to look at this is we're going to look at the map as it develops, and we're doing that now, but it's sort of, it's fluid, so things change as we go. But we're looking at which states do we need to compete in, and which states do we need to win, and which states do we need to influence and where do we need to influence the elections in other states that we can't win or we don't think we can win, but we can still influence. We're deciding where we're going to do that in order to block both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, obviously, our task is easier here if the race is closer between them. And so that's why, the more Donald Trump implodes, the harder it is for us to block either one of them. The race has been tightening in the past couple of days. So anyway, the point is, the tighter it gets, the easier our job is. The broader the gap between the two, the more work and the more difficult what I'm describing is. So we'll see how it plays out. But if we hadn't gotten in, if we hadn't decided to do this, then we and the American people would not have had the opportunity to block Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. People say, well, what about Gary Johnson? And I say, well, look, he's been at this for 2 election cycles. He's capped at in the single digits, and he has no chance of winning any states. And there are a few states that still allow proportional allocation of votes, so as we were describing earlier.
Yeah, just 2.
And plus, he seems like he's getting weaker as time goes on because he's getting a little loopy.
Yeah, his campaign is not growing; it's shrinking.
That's exactly right. And so we, in order to have a chance to win, we had to get in the fight, and we'll see how the battle develops, and if it develops in a way that gives us an even better chance, or if it makes it harder. But we don't have that. We wouldn't have had that chance at all had we not gotten in. So we're focused on, especially on the West. Minnesota is another important state. I think Iowa is going to be very important for us. We're on in Virginia, which is a state I would love to really campaign in. Donald Trump is already losing Virginia by 12 to 16 percentage points. It's really pathetic. So, we'll either compete for a victory there or just let Donald Trump absolutely lose it.
And I know that it's your home state, but your numbers were looking really good in Utah.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I was like, wow. I think you're actually like double digits for part of it, at least that I saw.
Well, I saw a poll that was in the field 8 days after I announced. I haven't seen polling since then for Utah. Maybe there's something more recent, but 8 days after we announced. Now, keep in mind, I was born there and I went to school there, but it's not like I'm a publicly known personality there at all. Right. I wasn't. 8 days after we announced this poll was in the field, I thought it would say we had 3%. Well, we had 9%.
Yeah.
So, and Gary Johnson had 12. So I'm optimistic there that we're going to be able to compete. Obviously, that's an important state. Wyoming's another important state because it rejected both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump by huge margins. Colorado's another important state. Idaho. So that's.
I got to ask about North Carolina, Evan. I got to ask.
Yeah, North Carolina is one that we're not on the ballot there. I think we've registered as a write-in, and if it ends up being close, then basically you can count on any swing state that's close. You can count on us putting up a fight there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, obviously I'm here in North Carolina along with Mike, and I understand North Carolina has some of the strictest election laws or ballot access laws in the country, so it's kind of tough to get on the ballot. But I'd like to be able to see your name on the ballot when I go to the polls, but we'll do whatever it takes. So
yeah, well, thank you very much. Well, I'll try to get an update to you on exactly what the scenario is there. We just posted some state pages or a state page for every state where we're going to basically give instructions to people who are following us and volunteering with us on what actions to take to sort of drive the ball forward for this effort.
I've seen a lot of those pages on Facebook and stuff like that, and it's amazing the sheer volume of traffic on those pages. The grassroots support for your candidacy is ridiculously. It's just it's amazing. And
so give us some of those.
You're my guy. I'm very happy about that.
Give us some of those links, presidential candidate Evan McMullin. Give us some of those links for us so that people can check you out.
Yeah, well, the most important one is just evanmcmullin.com. Go there and you can volunteer, you can donate, you can get to the state pages. I would say that everything helps. The volunteering, the donations. I mean, we've been really encouraged by our donor base is basically regular people. I mean, we've got some people who have donated who have maxed out, as they say, to the campaign too. But it's really coming from people who are chipping in, people who are donating $50 or less to the campaign. And that's where it's coming from. So it all helps. It all goes to ballot access, to getting our word out. We're, on the campaign side, we're doing digital advertising, which is extremely efficient from a cost perspective. And as you point out, we're getting so much support from people that's organic that makes any dollar that we put in to push something digitally is way more efficient than dollars that you'd spend if we didn't have such strong support out there. Yeah. And then there's a super PAC that's been stood up in support of the campaign, and they're the ones that are going to be running the television commercials and whatnot, I would imagine, given that they can, talk about money and politics. It's they're the ones that are able to raise sort of the mega checks that, as we were talking about before, we'd love to get out of the system, but that are so important to have an incredible campaign. But on the campaign side, it's evanmcmullin.com, and you can go there to find out how you can help, how you can volunteer, and to donate.
Yeah, and on Facebook, I know if you enter any state like North Carolina, it's North Carolina for Evan McMullin, and I think every other state is the same way. So it'd be Virginia for Evan McMullin, or whatever state you're in, and you can find the grassroots supporters on Facebook there.
Yep.
So I want to be respectful of your time. We were told you only had 30 minutes, and we've been on for a little over an hour. So I don't know. Do you guys have any other?
This is just fantastic. Thank you so much for really giving the time. I mean, I really do appreciate this. This is wonderful. And, I mean, I got to say, I've met a lot of CIA guys who worked with you kind of at French, and usually they're a bunch of a-holes. Sound like a, pretty good dude.
Well, just get to know me a little bit. Just get to know.
Yeah, maybe we got to go for a run or something. Yeah, I see where this is going.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of which, George W., he used to go mountain bike riding on Quantico all the time.
Oh, yeah.
He was president, so if you ever need to get away from it all once you're elected, I'm sure the Marines will take good care of you down there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's great. That's good to know.
I got buddies
who
were.
Oh yeah, go.
No, I had buddies who served up at Camp David, and their sea stories are out of this world. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear some of yours. I mean, they got a basketball hoop up there, so. Anyway.
So you got to make me one promise,
Yeah.
Mr. McMullin, presidential candidate, that when you get elected, sometime when things slow down a little and you have a spare moment, you got to come on the show again.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's it. I'll commit to that, and you've got it on tape, so there's no weaseling out of it.
Right.
There you go. There you go.
Pleasure.
Look at that.
Hey, and the last thing that I have to say is that just realize, a lot of smart people, but just know that there's a lot of veterans out there that could do a lot of good for this country, and not just after their service, and in public service, to go from being a veteran to being in a cabinet or something along those lines. That there's guys that they've put their life on the line once, and they'll definitely do it again. So.
They're looking for ways to continue to serve. Now that
Right.
they're out of uniform, that's the biggest issue we see with veterans, is that they no longer have a well-defined purpose.
Right.
So there are so many well-educated, highly experienced guys that would love to an opportunity to go up to the Hill and serve in various capacities.
And at the end of the day, I always say this: if you lead them, they will follow you. I promise.
Yeah.
No, that's the truth. And you know what? It's kind of a scary proposition, but if you lead them, they will follow you. So.
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's just such an important thing, this idea of putting the country's interests above your own. I mean, that's something that is just a given for people who serve in the armed services or people who serve with me in the agency. I mean, it's the price of entry. I mean, it's not even a question that that's what you're signing up for, and you prove it every time you go outside the wire. I mean, it's not.
And we see it as a privilege.
That's right. We see it as a privilege and an honor. And I look at the people who are leading us on the political side these days, and in so many cases that's just lost. I mean, I'm writing this op-ed right now that hopefully you'll see, but I talk about how our founding fathers, they risked their life to serve this country. I mean, that's what was required. If they were going to step onto the field, they were risking their lives to do it. And so it was clear that they were putting the interests of the country before their own, because if they were going to put their own first, then they wouldn't do that.
Right.
But they were putting the interests of the country and I believe their interests and the interests of the country were aligned. So that worked. But I think the same is true today. But we just right now, our leaders, the biggest threat they face is that they'll lose their next election or that they'll be ridiculed. Yet so many of them refuse to stand up for what is right for this country, whether that means spending less so that we can tax less and get our debt under control. Whether it means, in my opinion, on the Republican side, standing up to Clinton, obviously, but also to Trump and saying, no, you are not, you are not fit for the presidency, and you are not, you are not a conservative, and you are being manipulated by Vladimir Putin. I mean, our leaders need to be fighting and standing up for this country, even if it means they may lose their next election to do so. But they won't do it. Most of them will not do it. And I think, vets are, a different breed, and, they put their money where their mouth is already. And I think that's a lifestyle. That's not just something people did for a few years. I think that's so ingrained in people who have served in war zones, especially, that I agree. We gotta continue to give them opportunities to make this country what it can be.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll tell you, you said, leadership. Politicians, in my view, they're politicians. They're not necessarily leaders. And,
right.
If they're doing things out of selfish interest, then they don't have those qualities that define a leader. And
right.
It's time we put a leader back in the White House.
Agreed.
And that's what I mean. If you lead, they'll follow.
Yep.
And that's the truth. I guarantee it.
I believe it.
Well,
Evan McMullin, it's been a pleasure.
This is wonderful.
Pleasure's been all mine. Thank you very much, and I do look forward to the next opportunity to talk again.
Beautiful. Folks, if you haven't already done so, check out evanmcmullin.com. That's EvanMcMullin.com. evanmcmullin.com. Presidential candidate. This is amazing. Cigars and Sea Stories history right here. Fantastic. If you haven't already done so, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can find us on iTunes, as well as a variety of Android aggregators to include Stitcher and Player FM. Thank you so much to our sponsors, veteranslist.us. Check them out. Featured membership on there, 50% off with discount code Cigars and Sea. Veteranslist.us. The next time you go shopping, go to veteranslist.us. Enough said. That's it. Evan McMullin, thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Really
Thank
appreciate it. Folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Cigars and Sea Stories. And on that note, we cue the music.